Hi, my name is Susan Copeland and I'm one of the 6 elementary math curriculum specialists for CMS. Today, we will be taking a deep dive into Unit 3, Multiplying and Dividing Fractions. As you dive deep into Unit 3 today, remember our goal is to support students to know mathematics deeply, to apply mathematics, and to enjoy mathematics. Okay, so let's get started. Here's our agenda for today. We will work through these sections today. On each title page, you will see the parts of the agenda through which we are working. Let's get started by accessing some important documents. First, you will also need to log into My NC Ed Cloud and access MathRocks. The enroll code is on the screen if you need to enroll. Once you're in MathRocks, select 5th grade. On the 5th grade page, you can access the year at a glance using the top right button, then select Unit 3. Everything is in a folder except for the curriculum guide. I will refer to the curriculum guide throughout this deep dive, so you may want to have it open. You will also need to access the note catcher using the bit.ly on the screen if you haven't already opened it. Make a copy of it so you can edit it. Pause if you need to access these resources. Our first section today is the unit overview. You can find that on your note catcher. In this part of our deep dive, we will familiarize ourselves with the overarching story of the unit. We always want to begin a new unit by looking at the North Carolina Standard Course of Study aligned to the unit. The standards are located on slide 4 in the curriculum guide. NC5 NF4 and NC5 NF7. Click the Post-it note on slide 3 of the curriculum guide or the unpacking symbol at the bottom of the MathRocks 5th grade page to get to the unpacking document. There are some parts of NC5 NF4 that won't be addressed until Unit 6. I will tell you about those in a moment too. Pause the video and take a moment to read and annotate or take notes about these standards using the unpacking document from pages 26 through 32. I am going to share a few things I noticed and would want to take note of before teaching this unit. You might have some other things that you noticed. That's the great thing about working with a team. We all notice different things. And if we share what we are thinking about, it gives everyone a stronger picture of the goals of the work we will do in Unit 3. I noticed that when students multiply a whole number by a fraction, it could be denominators 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, or 12. But when students multiply a fraction by another fraction or a mixed number, the denominators will only be 2, 3, or 4. I also noticed that students should always be using area and length models to develop an understanding of the multiply across algorithm. In other words, they shouldn't just be multiplying across. I also want to point out that some aspects of this standard won't be seen until Unit 6. First, the second bullet of the standard is not yet addressed in this unit, and multiplying a mixed number by a mixed number is not addressed in this unit. Students add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators in Unit 6. They will need this skill to be able to multiply a mixed number times a mixed number. After the section on adding and subtracting fractions, then students will move to the yellow highlighted aspects of this standard. But again, that won't be until Unit 6. Now let's look at NC5 NF7. First of all, I want to say that the paragraph and standard are NF7 on page 30, but the check for understanding section on the right is still NF4. And really, NF4 goes halfway through the next page. So if you were confused, there was good reason. The check for understanding for NF7 begins on page 31, where it says unit fraction divided by a whole number. There are several important things to consider on this page, however. This standard is very limited in scope. It only includes a unit fraction divided by a whole number, or a whole number divided by a unit fraction. A unit fraction always has a denominator of 1. This is special because it is the fraction that represents the unit that repeats for the denominator. For example, 1/6 is repeated to make 2/6, 3/6, 4/6, 5/6, and so on. It is a repeated unit, like inches to measure length or kilograms to measure weight. I also notice that just like with multiplication, area and length models should be used to solve problems involving fraction division. And I also want to say that this statement is a little confusing where it says no limit to the denominators. It actually means not limited to 2, 3, and 4 like multiplication. Students will still experience the same denominators that they have been experiencing so far in elementary school: halves, thirds, fourths, fifths, sixths, eighths, tenths, twelfths, and maybe hundredths. Let's move to summarizing the unit on your note catcher. This is located at the beginning of lesson notes in the curriculum guide. Read the unit overview on slides 9 and 10 of your curriculum guide. When you finish, try to summarize the gist of the unit in a sentence. Then discuss with your team how the unit follows the design elements of invitation, deep study, and consolidation. Pause the video to complete this task. In this unit, students find the product of two fractions, divide a whole number by a unit fraction, and divide a unit fraction by a whole number. In Section A, students interpret area diagrams with two unit fractions for their side lengths, then a unit fraction and a non-unit fraction, and then two non-unit fractions. In Section B, students make sense of division situations and expressions that involve a whole number and a unit fraction. Students consider how changing the dividend or divisor changes the value of quotients, and they look for patterns. That's Math Practice 8. They use tape diagrams to represent and reason about division situations and expressions. In Session C, students apply what they learn to solve problems. The relationship between multiplication and division is reinforced when they notice that both operations can be used to solve the same problem. Now, let's think more specifically about how the standards and targets build across the sections of the unit. This unit is separated into 3 sections. Read the section overviews on the first 3 slides of the deck taken from slides 12 through 14 of the curriculum guide. Then look at the 8 task cards from the unit on slides 5 through 12. Slide each task to be below the section within which it falls. Talk to your PLC about how you decided which section each task belongs with. How does each task support the goals of the section? Pause the video now and return after completing this sort. Here are the sections with the lined cards. Cards E, H, and A are in Section A. These cards focus on multiplying a fraction by fraction and move from only unit fractions on E to non-unit fractions on A. Cards C, G, and B are from Section B. They address dividing a unit fraction by a whole number by unit fraction, and then both in a single problem. For Section C, cards F and D involve both multiplication and division. On card F, there are 2 similar sounding problems. However, one describes a division situation and the other describes a multiplication situation. Next, let's read the learning goals for each section and complete the activity below that aligns with each section. Discuss these guiding questions with a partner. What representations are used in these activities and how do they support students in understanding the learning goal for the section? What strategies might students use when they work on these activities? How are these strategies related to the section level learning goals. Pause the video now and return after completing these tasks. Again, I'm going to share a few thoughts I had, but take them with the thoughts your team had as you worked. These are not the right answer, it's just some things I thought about. The Section A task uses familiar context of food leftovers for students to begin to develop meaning for the fraction of a fraction. The diagrams start with half and only partition that half into fourths. Students must realize that to identify the size of the piece, they also have to partition the other half to see how many same-size pieces there are to determine the piece is an eighth. The Section B tasks allow students to notice a pattern and begin to generalize a rule about division of a whole number by a unit fraction. When two wholes are partitioned into 1/2 size pieces, there are 2 in each whole, so 2 times 2 is 4 pieces. When two wholes are partitioned into 1/3 size pieces, there are 3 in each whole. So 2 wholes times 3 pieces is 6. When two wholes are partitioned into 1/4 size pieces, there are 4 parts in each whole. So 2 wholes times 4 parts is 8 pieces. In general, students may notice that you multiply the number of wholes times how many pieces in the whole to divide. The Section C task challenges students to interpret problem situations and apply understanding of the operations of multiplication and division with fractions. If students are having difficulty determining which operation, consider using the Retell Represent Reason protocol with a big focus on the retell part to support students in making sense of the problems. Now we are ready for backwards planning. Looking closely at the end of unit assessment before teaching the unit will deepen your understanding of what students need to know and be able to do by the end of the unit. Assessment resources are located on slide 6 of the curriculum guide. You can use the assessment by clicking on the assessment icon. The reassessment is linked just below. If you haven't already taken the assessment, take a moment to complete the items. Consider which sections each task is aligned to and record the section on your note catcher. As you work, consider what misconceptions and challenges you can anticipate. When you finish, share your thoughts with your PLC. This is a great time to learn from the experience of your team. Pause the video now to take the assessment and identify which sections each question is aligned to. Okay, this was not easy, so I cheated and marked quite a few as both A and B or as B and C. And there might have been an A-B one in there. We saw context off and on throughout the whole unit. Context is super helpful in helping students to understand operations with fractions. So for most of the items in context, we could place them in more than one section. The difference is that C mixed multiplication and division contexts, but the assessment also mixes. So I just double marked this time. This was just where I landed, but you may have something different, and that's okay. Now let's see a task in action. We can use Unit 3, Lesson 3. The purpose of this lesson is for students to represent the product of a unit fraction and a non-unit fraction with a diagram. In this lesson, students move from multiplying 2 unit fractions to multiplying a unit fraction and a non-unit fraction. Let's look at Activity 1, the park. What kinds of things do you see and do in a park? Think about that for just a moment. Now tell your elbow partner, what do you see and do at the park? What ideas do you guys have? Some people use the slides and swings, some people go watch the ducks, some people play frisbee and other games. Well, our first activity today is about a park in the city. Take one moment to read the question and begin thinking about how you might represent this park. Now you will have about 5 minutes to work with your partner to represent the park. Parts A, B, and C ask you to represent the park in different ways. Pause the video and then press play when you're ready to continue. If this had been in an actual classroom, I would have monitored for students who label the diagram to show the different parts of the park. I might want a student who labels to share their work because it will help to communicate more clearly to other students in the classroom. Here is Anaya's diagram. How does Anaya's diagram represent 2/3? Yes, there are 3 vertical slices altogether and 2 of them are shaded. So the 2 of the 3 shaded would be 2/3 of the park. And we can see that Anaya labeled that as sports. How does the diagram represent 1/2 times 2/3? Yes, it means 1/2 of the 2/3 is shaded. And we can see that the top half of the 2/3 is shaded more darkly. So when we look at this, we know that the soccer field is represented by the darker shading. And that is 1/2 of 2/3, or 1/2 times 2/3. So how does the diagram represent how much of the entire park will be used for the soccer fields, which is also the value of 1/2 times 2/3. It shows 2 pieces that are each 1/6 of the whole. So that would be 2/6. Okay, let's wrap up our time today with some key points and next steps. First, area and length models should be used to represent multiplication and division of fractions. 2, using context supports students in making sense of fraction operations. And 3, it's not on here, but I just want to add the thought that when we multiply a whole number by a fraction, or when we divide with a unit fraction and a whole number, the denominators can be 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 10, 12, or 100. But when we're multiplying a fraction times a fraction, then we will only use halves, thirds, and fourths. So let's think about next steps. Just like last time, I'm going to say this again because it's so important. Please, please use the daily lesson notes as you plan for each day's lessons. I had several people contact me and tell me that the lesson numbers did not line up. So I'm going to talk about that again. I know that I talked about that in the second unit, but I want to say it one more time in hopes that it'll maybe make a little more sense this time. So one of the most important things to know about Unit 3 and Unit 2, if you're in it, is that I had to make some changes. And in Unit 3, I had to make quite a few changes to ensure that the lessons were aligned to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. So for that reason, many of the student workbook pages will have different images and different fractions, but look similar enough to be a little confusing. So when you're looking at the lesson notes for each day in the CMS curriculum guide, they're right here. This will help you know when changes have been made. And when you go in Math Rocks, you can look in the workbook folder to access updated pages for these units. And you might want to upload them if you upload into Google Classroom or Canvas, and then you're going to want to, or you may want to print them or at least post them and make sure students understand the changes that have been made, because their workbook won't match what's on the screen if I had to make edits because of the standards. But the CMS copy of the workbook pages, if you opt to use those, will match what's on the screen and in the lesson plan. Let's look at this a little bit more closely. Okay, so this is for lessons 3 and 4. Notice there are notes about standard alignment. It tells us the warm-up and activity 2 have been adjusted to align to the North Carolina Standard Course of Study. If you look at this lesson number, you'll see that it is CMS, the teacher lesson 3. The slides are 3, the cool down's 3, everything is labeled number 3, except the student workbook page, because that's printed by Illustrative Mathematics. And they are labeling it Lesson 4. So when students turn for the workbook page in their workbooks, they're actually going to go to the one that's labeled Lesson 4, even though for you it's Lesson 3. You can access the student lesson where the other links are when another lesson has been created. So if you click on that, you can access a downloadable student workbook page there. So let's look at a couple pages just to see. They look a lot alike. So on the left, you see what is in the student Illustrative Mathematics workbooks, the ones from Open Up. And on the right is the workbook page that I made. They're the same. They're actually C is in the workbook page for Illustrative Mathematics. But if you look very closely at the diagram, the Illustrative Mathematics diagram is actually multiplying fifths and halves, which we just talked about a minute ago. They just multiply halves, thirds, and fourths. So I had to make a slight adjustment for CMS, and now you can see that it's fourths and halves instead. And the fractions, if you look at A, it's multiplying, we can see it's 3/5 times 1/2 in that, but over on the right, it's 3/4 times 1/2. So I'm just alerting you that if students just go to their regular workbook page, that it's not going to be exactly the same as what you have on your screen. So you want to make sure you download the CMS one if it's listed, and you want to make sure you're going to the right lesson number. So there you could have double confusion. Next year, we're hoping to print our own workbooks, so we won't run into this issue. Activity 1 was the same on both sheets, but then you can see also on Activity 2 the model and the fractions are different there as well. I just want to thank you. Please feel free to reach out to me. You can see my email is here, but I also just showed you where it was on the other form. Please let me know if you need anything. Okay? Thank you so much, and I hope you enjoy teaching Unit 3.